Hezbollah's top military commander is dead and the clock is ticking. As Israel braces for Hezbollah's revenge, the IDF launches emergency drills and prepares for every possibility. But just as tensions ignite with Lebanon, a shadow deal unfolds in Cairo. Hamas still refuses to lay down arms, but Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey are pushing ahead with the peace plan. Could this ceasefire be the calm before an even deadlier storm? Stay tuned. This is Israel Undiplomatic. Shalom. Welcome to another episode of Israel Undiplomatic. I'm Mark Regev here in Jerusalem, and I'm speaking to my co-host, Ruthie Blum, who, as she was last week, is in New York City. Hi, Ruthie. How are you?
Hello, Mark. I'm missing Israel, that's for sure.
I know the same feeling when you're out of the country, especially when there's a lot going on, and we've got a lot to discuss this week. What would you like to start with, Ruthie?
Well, let's talk about the Hezbollah commander, a military commander that Israel took out on Sunday. He was a very high up in Hezbollah. He had also trained through the ranks from a young man. He was 57 when he was killed, but he's been decades in Hezbollah. And he was instrumental in forming the Radwan force that are the really evil guys in Lebanon, in Hezbollah. He also trained Hezbollah forces in Syria. Anyway, so he's out. But because of that, the Israeli army had to really heighten alert in northern Israel and conducted a huge drill to make sure it was prepared for any scenario, and warned the troops in the north about being prepared for that, for perhaps a retaliatory attack. And I don't know about the residents of the north. I have a feeling they're a little nervous as well.
So I'd say the following. First of all, let's be more precise about who we killed. His name was, and it's difficult to pronounce. I'm afraid my Arabic isn't as good as yours, Ruthie, but his name was Tabtabai, and he was the head of military operations in Hezbollah. Even in Hebrew, they called him like their army chief of staff when they talked about this guy being killed. And not only was he a vicious enemy of Israel, as you said, he was responsible for the creation of their shock troops, their strike force on the border, which on D-Day, in the Hezbollah perspective, would have stormed across the frontier into northern Israel and done an October 7th type massacre, right? And so this guy was a formidable and worthy person to be targeted by the IDF. I think it's also important to tell our viewers and listeners that there was a $5 million bounty on him from the U.S. government, because not only was he involved in killing Israelis, he also had a few American lives on his belt, so to speak. And once again, I don't think the Israeli army will ask the Americans for the money, but there was a $5 million bounty on his head put out by the U.S. government. Now, what does all this mean? Look, we're theoretically, for more than a year now, we've had a ceasefire in Lebanon. But the good thing about the ceasefire in Lebanon is in the understandings reached. If Hezbollah breaks the understandings, Israel can act and is free to act. And one of the understandings is Hezbollah is not allowed to rearm. Of course, it must also disarm, but it definitely can't rearm. And it can't, it can't sharpen its sword. And this man, as the head of the military wing of Hezbollah, as its senior military commander, he was very much ahead of the curve in trying to get Hezbollah to sharpen its sword, so to speak, to rebuild its military capability after Israel gave it such a beating last year. And so we were right, and I don't think anybody serious condemned us for taking him out. I know the Lebanese government did. We can speak more about that later. But he was a good target, and it just shows that though the ceasefire with Lebanon is shaky, Israel is insisting on the following overall policy, which is if Hezbollah is acting, even if they're not shooting at us, but if they're acting to rebuild their military machine, their terror machine, we're not going to allow quiet just to leave them alone. No. From our point of view, the mere act of Hezbollah trying to rearm is a provocation that will be answered. And that's a huge difference between the Israel of today and the Israel of before October 7th, 2023.
That's absolutely right. And you know something, excuse me for using the vernacular, but Lebanon has a nerve. The Lebanese government, part of this deal, the main part of the deal, was that the Lebanese army would disarm Hezbollah. It has done nothing, as usual. Now, Israel, for the entire year since the ceasefire was signed, Hezbollah has been rebuilding, has been even building tunnels, has recruited terrorists, Israel has seen terrorists moving, transferring weapons, etc., and also working to build up Hezbollah in Syria again. So now Israel, what it did, the whole idea was that the ceasefire that Israel was relevant to southern Lebanon along the Israeli border, but Israel posted 5 points higher in north of southern Lebanon to make sure it was at the ready for Hezbollah activities. And for the entire year, Hezbollah has violated that ceasefire. But the Lebanese government has a nerve in criticizing Israel for defending itself against Hezbollah actions. It's totally useless, that government. So the question is it useless? Or is it purposely looking the other way so as not to anger Hezbollah? Which, whatever the case is, Israel cannot allow it, as you pointed out. Hezbollah is perfectly ready and able to commit another October 7th massacre the way Hamas did. Interestingly, it didn't join on October 8th. It did join by firing missiles, but not by invading the northern border the way Hamas invaded the southern border.
So, look, you talk about the government of Lebanon, and you say correctly that they're not fulfilling their responsibilities under the ceasefire, which is to disarm Hezbollah. Now, this new president of Lebanon, I think, would genuinely like to disarm Hezbollah. He's spoken, he's only been there for a short period of time. He wants to try to change the trajectory of Lebanon's development. He wants Lebanon to reestablish its sovereignty. He doesn't like the idea that this is Iranian-controlled militia inside his country, which is more powerful than any other military force in the country, including, unfortunately, the Lebanese army. And so he wants, actually, I think, to see Hezbollah disarmed. The problem is he's not sure he's strong enough, and he's not sure he has public support to do that. And in a funny way, of course, Israel took him out, took the Hezbollah commander out in Beirut because, he was a legitimate target and he was doing nasty things, and we had a right to take him out. But in attacking a target in Beirut, right in the Lebanese capital, to take out this Hezbollah leader, it's also a way of putting pressure on the Lebanese government. And the Lebanese government can say to the Lebanese people, listen, unless we disarm Hezbollah, there'll be more Israeli strikes like this, and before long, we could be back to full-scale war. In other words, I'm hopeful that not only did we take out a senior Hezbollah person who deserved to die, but at the same time, in parallel, these sort of strikes, especially because it was in the Lebanese capital, it wasn't in southern Lebanon, in some, remote village away from the capital. It was in the heart of the Lebanese capital. I think that's pressure that the Lebanese government wants on itself to give itself domestic legitimacy to take on Hezbollah and finally do what it promised to do in the ceasefire agreement.
Well, I'll believe it when I see it. I mean, we have had this issue with subsequent Lebanese governments. First of all, Hezbollah was prominent in the Lebanese parliament. And for years, from the first Lebanon war and the second Lebanon war, Israel constantly says, we have no beef with the people of Lebanon. On the contrary, we would love Lebanon to resume being the Paris of the Middle East. I mean, Beirut was always called the Paris of the Middle East, And the trouble is that rather than helping Israel do that, the Lebanese government then criticize Israel for doing it. So as you know, you and I are often arguing about this because my point is, if they're afraid of their own people, then what chance is there for any kind of peaceful relations? Until they're not afraid that their people will go against them for being against the terrorists, there's no hope for that. And I do believe the Lebanese people, most of them, I don't know, I'm saying from what I read and from what I hear, that mostly the Lebanese people hate Hezbollah and they would like to eliminate it. So then I don't understand what the problem is with the government and the army.
So I have long experience in Lebanon. I was a soldier in the aftermath of the first Lebanon War, which was in 1982. I missed the major fighting, but I came in immediately after it. I was government spokesperson, foreign ministry spokesman during the second Lebanon War. What's that? That's now 10 years ago. And I've been following these events very, very closely. And I think there is a chance for Lebanon to move in the right direction. I met Lebanese in track 2 diplomacies where Israelis unofficially meet Lebanese, yes? And I heard from Lebanese people saying things. One person said to me, "You have to tell Netanyahu thank you for taking down Hezbollah." And I said, "We did it for us, not for you." And he said, "I know that, but it still helped us because in Lebanon, you had Hezbollah up top and everyone else, all the other communities and the other political parties down the bottom, and Hezbollah dominated the society. And what Israel did in taking out Hezbollah is we pushed them down to size, and the other groups in Lebanon finally felt empowered, that they had some control over the destiny of their country. And I think most Lebanese want to see that process continue. And Israel's strike, as I said, not only took out a bad guy, but maybe helps empower the current Lebanese president and the current Lebanese government to do the right thing and follow through. Look, it's difficult for them. Hezbollah are ruthless fighters, and for the Lebanese army to go against Hezbollah, it's a difficult decision. But by applying this sort of pressure, we're not only giving them legitimacy, we're saying unless you want another Lebanon war, right? You have to do this. You committed to do it. You promised France. You promised the United States. The Arab League supports this decision. It's a difficult decision for you, but you've got to take it, and now's the time.
Right. But by the way, just one little correction. Do you realize that the second Lebanon war was almost 20 years ago? Not 10.
Sorry, my mistake.
And-
My mistake.
No,
You are correct.
And that's but it just shows
Yeah.
how long these things are dragging out. That's the point. And I remember visiting my son on a base when he was taking part in the second war in Lebanon, and he has since then been in Lebanon. He's been in Gaza several times. This is just to show how these terrorists never give up and they keep recruiting more. And the question is, did this war in Gaza, and by the way, the Seven Front War, because Israel was also dealing with the Houthis in Yemen and striking Iran's nuclear facilities, etc. But again, we're not done. And we're not done because the terrorists refuse to lay down their arms. And that brings us now
Can I
to
just say
Gaza
one more thing
as
about
well.
Lebanon? Well, one more thing about Lebanon, with your permission. And you said it quite correctly. First of all, you corrected my mistake, which is always very important that you correct my mistakes. It was 2 decades ago, the Second Lebanon War. And what is interesting about that war finished with the UN Resolution 1701, which said Hezbollah had to be disarmed. And 2 decades later, right, we're still there waiting for Hezbollah to be disarmed. Now, through Israel's military strikes, much of Hezbollah's military machine was destroyed. So we helped. We could even tell our friends at the UN that we actually did something very practical to help implement a UN resolution, right? Though I'm not sure they'd smile particularly to hear that, but I'd smile in saying it. But the truth is, the international community has been calling for Hezbollah to be disarmed for 2 decades. It hasn't happened. Hopefully it'll happen now. It'll only happen if we all keep the pressure up.
Look, you mentioned the UN, and this is also going to be relevant to Gaza. Resolution 1701 that ended the Second Lebanon War. The joke is that the troops stationed in southern Lebanon, meant to monitor the ceasefire, were UNIFIL forces. And basically, they just sat there when they didn't abscond. they just watched Hezbollah rearming, marching along back and forth, back and forth. That's how useless the UNIFIL troops were, and how they've always been. Now, that's why I want to talk about Gaza, because we're now talking about, again, the terrorists. No matter what happened, we supposedly have a ceasefire in Gaza, but the terrorists keep coming out of their little holes and firing on Israeli troops. They still haven't, though another body of a hostage was returned to Israel yesterday. There are 2 more dead bodies left in Gaza, and they were, by the way, also all supposed to have been returned last month when all the live hostages were returned. But okay, the issue is that the United States is trying to find a post-war force that will monitor, that will be, for post-war Gaza. Now, the Arab countries don't want to do it because they don't want to be confronting Hezbollah. In the end, Israel will have to do that. No international force wants to do it. There's talk of having the Palestinian Authority take a role in post-war Gaza, and you know what I think about that's a disaster. But aside from everything else, there was a meeting held, well, reportedly anyway, in the Arab press, a meeting held in Cairo between, or is still going on maybe, the so-called mediators of this conflict, Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey. Qatar and Turkey being terrible enemies of Israel's, being supporters of terrorism and Hamas specifically. And Egypt being, well, let's put it this way, either turning a blind eye to Hamas or not being helpful, let's put it that way, in their so-called negotiations. And that's what's going on. They're talking about post-war Gaza when Hamas says, no, we're not going to disarm. And the second phase of Trump's 20-point plan only is supposed to begin when Hamas, when all the hostages were returned. And the second phase involves Hamas disarming, which A, it refuses to do, and B, that's why it's taking so long to return the remains of the last dead hostages.
So you raise a number of important issues, Ruthie. Number one, when you talked about UNIFIL not doing anything to prevent Hamas from building up from preventing Hezbollah from building up in South Lebanon a formidable military machine, yes? So that has to be a lesson, as you say correctly, for what happens in Gaza. And there's all this talk about some sort of international force in Gaza. And the truth is, in the Israeli way of looking at it, and I think you said it, and I'll say it in my words, I don't think there's a difference of it, that the only force that will demilitarize Gaza, the only force that will take the guns away from Hamas, is not a UN-sponsored force. It's Israel. That's our job. And as Prime Minister Netanyahu has said on more than one occasion, either they'll keep their commitments under the agreement and disarm voluntarily, or we will disarm them. But either way, they will be disarmed. The idea that a UN force would go in there and force them to disarm, no. What a UN force can do is, after the work's being done, they could theoretically police a territory. But even then, I think it would have to be, to use what we spoke about 5 minutes ago, like in Lebanon. If Israel saw something going on, I don't think we'd expect the UN to go and take on Hamas. Israel would do a targeted strike and deal with the Hamas threat and not allow it to grow, not allow it to sperm and do other things. And I think that has to be, the Lebanon model has to be the model for Gaza. One thing you say about the UN and Gaza and everything that's going on there, it's clear to me that we only go to stage 2 when we finish stage 1. It's clear to me that stage 1 is, first of all, release of all the hostages, including the deceased, and there's still another 2, so that has to be done. If we go to stage 2, the most important thing is the disarmament issue. And here, with your permission, I want to spend a minute on that. We only got the ceasefire in the first place over a month ago because Israel had the military pressure on. We were going into Gaza City, the largest Hamas stronghold, and we were going in with American support, with American munitions, with Trump saying Israel finished the job. So it was a very real and credible threat. And at the same time, the Americans very skillfully used Hamas's two best friends in the Sunni world, which is Qatar and Turkey. As you say correctly, neither a friend of Israel, both of them very close friends of Hamas. And precisely because they were good friends of Hamas, that leverage was effective. And the combination of military pressure and diplomatic pressure got us over the finishing line with the ceasefire deal. I would argue if this is going to work, in other words, if there's going to be a diplomatic solution, in other words, if this deal is going to work, it's only because that pressure is maintained and even etched up a bit. In other words, it's crucial that Israel have a serious military threat that is credible, that they understand that if they don't do what they have to do, Israel goes in and finishes the job. That's an important message, and we might even have to show them that we're serious. And at the same time, Qatar and Turkey have to continue the pressure on Hamas, because if that pressure sort of eases up, we'll see Hamas play games. They're not going to give up any of their weapons unless they feel they have to. They have to feel that they have no alternative.
No, absolutely. The trouble is that they continue to criticize Israel. That you say they're putting pressure on Hamas, and yes, but they're doing that whole both sides thing, violations on both sides. No, they're not violations on both sides. There are violations only on the other side. And by the way, during the fighting in Lebanon, during this war, in the last 2 years before the ceasefire, UNIFIL lied, as the UN always does, but UNIFIL kept accusing Israel of targeting its forces when anytime it launched a strike against Hezbollah. Now, part of the time, UNIFIL was placing itself right next to Hezbollah points of operation and then claiming that Israel was targeting UNIFIL, which was a big fat lie, just as all of these lies about how Israel targeted civilians and Israel was starving Gazans. It was all a lie. But this is what I'm saying, that UNIFIL was participating in the lies about Israel. And Qatar and Turkey certainly are. But even Egypt is playing that both sides of the fence game. And so when you say, yes, you're absolutely right, that because of their connection to Hamas, they were able to apply pressure. But, the truth is that if they had really done it, this would have been taken care of right after the war started. All right. It's a lie. All right. They're not really taking care of it. They were actually helping Hamas while pretending, for Washington's sake, that they were the key mediators in helping release the hostages. That's the point. They are liars, and that's why we can't trust them. And yes, I agree with you. Israel has to be the one to take care of its own interests, militarily for sure. But all I'm asking is that the other countries leave us alone and let us do the job instead of attacking us for it. First, they accuse us of wanting other boots on the ground for us, which is a lie. And then when we have our own boots on the ground, they attack us for doing what's necessary and also helps them. So that's what is a problem here. And that is why I'm very skeptical about the next steps in Gaza and in Lebanon.
So I want to say something. I disagree with one of the things you said. You said that UNIFIL put its forces right next to Hezbollah positions in South Lebanon. And there's no doubt that they were together. But I think there was also, and predominantly, that Hezbollah used UNIFIL forces as a human shield, the same way Hamas in Gaza used UNRWA and other UN facilities to shield its machine. This is a standard behavior by terrorists, that they cozy up, they find an area where they think Israel can't hit at, using the UN as a shield. The other thing that you said that I don't agree with the facts, but I disagree with the facts, but I disagree with your interpretation. You said that Qatar and Turkey, they say both sides are responsible and both sides have made violations. And what they say publicly, okay, I'm not saying it's not important, But what is more important in my perspective, of course, I said at the beginning that Qatar and Turkey are no friends of Israel. They're friends of Hamas. So what they say public, okay, of course they're going to criticize Israel. The real question is, what are they saying behind closed doors? Are they telling Hamas, you promised to demilitarize, you have to fulfill that commitment? Because if that message is unequivocal when the doors are closed and they're inside the room, it really doesn't matter what they say publicly.
Well, that's true, but I just don't believe that that's what they're saying privately. And the reason I don't is that there were many more methods of applying pressure, such as Qatar kicking out Hamas from Doha, which it didn't do. So, the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. But, you just said that that Hamas was using UNRWA as a human shield the way that Hezbollah was using UNIFIL. But may I just add that UNRWA is Hamas. All UNRWA employees were pro-Hamas or members of Hamas. I wouldn't say that it needed to use them as human shields. They were complicit in this entire war. And maybe, with UNIFIL, I can't say the same because there's not as much proof. But there certainly was proof about UNRWA. UNRWA employees participated in the October 7th massacre. UNRWA employees also held hostages in their homes. They were perfectly well aware that under their schools and hospitals were missile factories and storage facilities. They knew it and they were participants in it. And in fact, we saw certain films of the hostages in tunnels where behind them there were UNRWA bags, UNRWA logos on equipment. So they were complicit. They weren't used as human shields. Who were used as human shields were the women and children and the babies that the whole world was screaming about Israel targeting, which again was a big lie, a blood libel as usual. So anyway, I'm just very skeptical about the next steps because now we're down to the wire where, all right, what happens when the last two hostages' bodies are returned, if they are? I mean, that's part of the deal. And then what? And I really don't see how we're, at the moment, it's almost like a war of attrition, a mini war of attrition, where terrorists are popping out of tunnels and then we're having to kill them because they're targeting troops. Now, I don't know how long the White House is going to accept that. I don't know how long the other partners are going to accept that. And in Lebanon, it's very likely we're going to have another round of fighting because though, yes, we took out Hezbollah's main military commander, and that's wonderful. But, you and I both saw we took out the Hezbollah's top brass. We also wounded in the beeper operation. We severely wounded many, many Hezbollah operatives. But this is like a game of whack-a-mole for all of those killed and all of the top commanders killed and terrorists taken out. There's always more. There are always more being recruited. And it's impossible not to be constantly militarily ready for it, for Israel.
I agree with that entirely. We have to be ready. And just as we've used force in Lebanon now when Hezbollah breaks, its commitments, I think we have to be ready to do the same in Gaza, not only to protect our forces, but to ultimately lead to the disarmament of Hezbollah. And I think I said before, only the military pressure, only Israel's willingness to use military force is the only way to get a diplomatic solution. Otherwise, why would they agree? It's clear terrorist groups don't suddenly become Boy Scouts and decide they're going to be good people and abide by, international consensus. It's not going to happen. They'll only do it if they're compelled to do it. On your issue, briefly, I don't want to go back too much, but on UNIFIL, not on UNIFIL, on UNRWA, you're 100% correct. And there is a difference there. You're right. UNRWA as an organization, totally involved in the Hamas military machine. Yes, they're not innocent bystanders as an organization. Maybe, as you say correctly, in their schools and so forth, there were innocent people. But Hamas had overtaken the UNRWA organization. It was like a hostile takeover. The leadership of UNRWA, the unions that run UNRWA, it's all hand in hand with Hamas, and that's clear. And the UN would have you believe it's just a few bad apples, yes? Not true. The whole organization from top down, unfortunately, is today a Hamas subsidiary. But let's move on now. We wanted to do something new this week that we haven't done before, and Ruthie explained that exactly.
Well, what we're going to do, we've decided to add another feature if viewers and listeners are interested in it, that we are going to read a question submitted by one of the members of our YouTube channel. And it's relevant to our last week's program. And I'll just read it quickly. Let me just call it up on my screen. The question today is, what do you think Saudi Arabia really wants right now? Why is the kingdom investing so much money in the United States? What is it trying to gain? So, I will just start by saying that there have been reports in the international media that after President Trump's meeting with Crown Prince MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, in the White House, that was it appeared to be very chummy, and isn't it wonderful? And they made some kind of, he said, Saudi Arabia is going to invest $1 trillion or something. That apparently behind the scenes, Trump got irritated with MBS because he said, I can't join the Abraham Accords at the moment, and I can't have normalization at the moment because my people are so anti-Israel because of the war in Gaza.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that report too, and I want to say the following, okay? America and Saudi Arabia have a good relationship. Saudi Arabia wants American military backing. They want a defense arrangement with the United States. They want access to top-tier U.S. equipment. They know that their relationship with America is crucial for their security, and they don't see Israel necessarily as someone who's going to attack them. They worry about Iran and other bad actors in the region, but primarily Iran and its proxies, and they see a U.S. security commitment to them and sales of top-tier weapons from the United States as crucial. Of course, America knows the importance of Saudi Arabia oil, stability in the Middle East. They know that the Saudis have a lot of money to invest, and you understand that it's a two-way street where both parties, if everyone talks about Trump being a transactional president, it's clear there are good things that both sides need and want from each other, the basis for a very positive relationship. But where's the problem, Ruthie? And this is not clear to me, is that if Saudi Arabia can get its F-35 stealth planes, yes, and its nuclear cooperation, and its 300 Abraham tanks, and its defense commitment from the US, if it can get all that without normalizing ties with Israel, I think we can kiss normalization goodbye for the time being. Saudi Arabia will only normalize ties with Israel if all those goodies that the Saudis want from the Americans are conditioned on that normalization. Because why would they deal with their own internal criticism? Why would they do something that from their point of view is a change of, upgrading policy? They have under-the-table cooperation with Israel. That suits them well. But to go publicly, there are challenges for them. I don't deny it. But they'll do it if they get important assets from the United States. But if those assets are anyway going to come from the United States, as I say, we can kiss normalization behind. And I think the ball here is very much in America's court, very much in the White House. To what extent are they willing to let these goodies, this stuff that the Saudis want badly, are they going to give to the Saudis without a specific and immediate commitment to normalization?
Right. Well, something interesting about the word normalization, because, the Abraham Accords talk about normalization between Israel and Arab neighbors. Now, there's a difference between peace and normalization. What is the difference? Israel has had for decades an actual peace treaty with Egypt. Let's give that as an example. No normalization. After the peace treaty was signed with Egypt all those decades ago, Israelis were so thrilled. Great, let's go to Egypt. We'll watch belly dancers. We'll go to the pyramids. We'll be great tourists. But the Egyptians remained anti-Semitic. They didn't come and visit Israel. They hate Israelis, they hate Jews. It's in their newspapers. So it didn't really matter who the government was. That was a peace accord. Okay, so there wasn't war between Israel and Egypt anymore, but normalization was not there. Unlike, for example, if you take the United Arab Emirates, who signed the Abraham Accords, and Israelis did go to the to the UAE, to Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and they actually were very warmly welcomed there. That is more of a normalization than a peace treaty, because after all, the UAE wasn't ever at war with Israel physically. But normalization requires the public, all right? Because that's what normalization means, that the two peoples have, they cooperate, not only with tourism, with agriculture, with high tech, all of those things. Now, when MBS says, I would do it, but my people really hate Israel, I mean, that's basically what he's saying. He's the crown prince, all right? So this is a kingdom. It's not a democracy. It's not like he needs to get reelected. But these dictators and kings are always afraid, as is the case in Jordan, afraid of being toppled or overthrown by their people. That's what they're afraid of. But if he says that, and I believe him, I have no reason to doubt that he says, look, I'd do it, but my people don't want it. What chances are for normalization, even if they sign some kind of deal? Because again, Saudi Arabia was never physically at war with Israel the way other Arab neighbors were. So there's only normalization with the Abraham Accords. And if that doesn't exist, I don't see how he's going to sign them.
So I'd say the following, Ruthie. Number one, there's the Egyptian example, which is not a good one. But then you've got the Emirati example. In the Gulf, the United Arab Emirates made a treaty with Israel, normalized ties, and there's a lot of content there, right? And I would hope that if we move forward with Saudi Arabia, it would be along the lines that we have with the Emirates. I'd remind you that during this war that we've just been through, Lufthansa wasn't flying to Israel, British Airways were not flying to Israel, Air France was not flying to Israel, but those flights from Tel Aviv to Abu Dhabi and Tel Aviv to Dubai, they were going every day. And the relationship is strong. And if you ask me if MBS thinks he might have a problem with his people, if he can tell his people through normalization, we get top-tier U.S. equipment. Through normalization, we get a serious defense pact with a U.S. commitment to protect us. In other words, if he can tell his people normalization brings goodies for our kingdom, things that we always wanted, then I think he can sell it to his people.
Well, I don't know about that, because here's the thing. You meant what happened with the Emirates is that the people were very open to this.
Correct.
The people were open to it. The people warmly welcomed Israelis. They opened kosher restaurants and things like that. All right. The people. If MBS says the trouble is my people, it basically says they hate Israel, and so they're not. I'm not saying that in the future at some point this won't change.
But maybe it's just an excuse.
No, but maybe it's just I was trying to give him the benefit of the doubt, but which I don't usually do because I'm very suspicious of MBS. But that's another topic. Here's the thing. He also said, without a two-state solution, I can't do it and all that. Again, that whole business of a Palestinian state, anybody who conditions anything on that, it's already a losing proposition. There cannot be a Palestinian state. There cannot be one. I mean, maybe long after you and I are dead, when the Palestinians, I say so-called, because they weren't really a people. They became an ideological and political and religious entity in a certain geographical location. But if you want to say the Arabs of Ramallah and Gaza, they have not given up their desire, their goal to annihilate the Jewish state and Jews. So, and also they just educate their own people to mass murder and all that stuff and to welcome martyrdom. So they cannot have a state.
Ruthie,
so any leader who says that it's dependent on that means it ain't happening.
Ruthie, I'm not sure he says that exactly. I think he needs to tick the box on the Palestinian issue. I don't think anyone's talking about making a Palestinian state anytime soon. They want some amorphous language about a pathway with reforms and conditions. And the Prime Minister has made his position clear that there's not going to be a Palestinian state in your or my lifetime. And so I'm not sure that is a crucial issue, but we're coming to the end of our time. And you wanted to say something to the person who asked the letter, who asked us the
Yes.
question.
Well, no, to everybody. What I'd like to say is that if anybody else would like a question featured or to support the work we're doing at JNS, you can join as a channel member through the link in the video description below.
I'll see you next week, Ruthie.
Looking forward to it, Mark.